Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going over this little sucker right here. It's the Trijicon ACOG TA31-H or hotel version. So it's going to be mostly the same as other TA31s we talked about here on the channel. The big differentiation is going to be the reticle. We'll get into that, as well as what makes the TA31 such a popular optic out there. This one here is one that you guys see on military rifles all the time. It's probably the most used by the military ACOG. They use other ACOGs as well, of course, but this one is probably the most common. There's some good reasons for that. But like any optic, there's some pros and cons to it. So we'll get into the feature set of it, basically how it works, how the reticle works, and then what I think of it overall at the end. We're going to get into a little bit of the details, but one thing that's hard to convey about any sort of ACOG, if you've never actually handled one, you've only handled sort of like budget prism scopes, it's just how well built they are. I mean, they feel rock solid. The housing's made of forged aluminum, and it's got that rubberized coating on the outside, and really it makes it impervious to any sort of weather. Obviously, it's completely sealed off. These things are submersible, I believe, down to 100 meters, which is one of the many reasons that the Marine Corps loves them. Those folks pride themselves on being amphibious, so being able to take your optic into the water is something that's extremely important to them. For most regular folks, being out in the rain for a hunting scope is certainly good. You won't have to worry about it at all. You can be in a heavy downpour and it'll hold up just fine. So all around, the construction is just awesome on these. So getting into some of the basic features of it, it's a 4x scope. So one of the benefits of that in terms of a prism scope, the higher magnification you get, generally speaking, the more field of view you get. There are some exceptions to that. So the field of view on this one's going to be, I believe, 36 feet or something like that at 100 yards, 36.8 feet, which is a good bit more than some of the other ACOGs out there, the lower powered ones. Now the trade-off for that is very short eye relief. So your eye relief on this scope is 1.5 inches. So you probably noticed me shooting it. My eye was right up there, so that is one of the downsides to it. Now, in a normal standing shooting position, it's just fine. You're not going to have any issues with it. But in awkward shooting positions, you may have a hard time getting your eye into that eye box back there where it needs to be in order to get good eye relief. And it's just sort of a trade-off again, like we said. So you get good field of view, but that short eye relief is something you get with all the TA31 models. From the factory, the scope comes set at 100 meters, i.e. on a flat top rifle, it should be pretty close to zero at 100 meters, which is where it needs to be for the reticle to work properly. However, we do have our windage and elevation adjustments there, so you can dial it in for your specific rifle and your specific load. On that note, we should point out that this particular optic is factory set, at least the reticle is, I should say, is set for 55 grain ammunition out of a 20-inch barrel. Now, that said, there's a bunch of different formulas online if you guys look around, or you can just plug your actual load that you're using into a ballistic calculator, like if you're using a 62 grain bullet, for instance, coming out of a 16-inch barrel. Just plug that into a ballistic caliber and it'll tell you where to zero this to get your holds pretty close. Now, with most ammo out there, everything except for the really heavy stuff, the stadia lines in the reticle are going to be more of an error point than the actual load, i.e. 55 to 62 grain, 20 versus 16-inch bullets, or barrel rather, I should say. So just something to keep in mind there. Getting back to the windage and elevation adjustments, the adjustments themselves are ½ inch at 100 meters. So that is how they work. So they're half MOA adjustments. And you can see there while I'm screwing it back on, that the cap there is O-ring sealed and it snugs down nice and tight to maintain that waterproof feature of the optic. I mentioned earlier that it's pretty heavy duty and feels very robust. Now it comes in without the mount. This is a TA51 mount here that it does come with. Without the mount, it comes in at 9.9 ounces. With it, I think on my scale it was like 13.6 ounces. But when you guys saw me using it, you saw me using it with this particular mount right here, which is the American Defense quick detach mount. This one's one of my favorite mounts for the ACOG. Works really well, lightens it up, and obviously gives you the quick detach feature. So you can use it with either one. One thing I will point out though is if you do happen to purchase one of these TA31s, I recommend Loctiting in the screws on the bottom, and then also Loctiting in your little knobs here once you actually get it zeroed in. So put some either purple or blue Loctite on the threads there, and then close it down and make sure it doesn't move around on you. Over time, if you don't, it will. It's just a matter of time. So better off just putting a little Loctite on there to prevent that. Longtime viewers of the channel here know that I've been using TA31s for a long time. I really like them. They're good all-around optics. And this one is the H designation at the end, which is what the reticle is the H reticle. This one is in red illumination. However, there are green and amber versions out there. So just pointing that out. That said, the H reticle is going to be what's known as the horseshoe reticle. This particular horseshoe reticle has other holds as well. So as you can see along the windage axis, you have those two dots, and you also have the hash marks. All of those are going to be 5 mils apart. So for those of you that know how to do wind holds with mils, that'll give you a rough estimation on moving targets and things like that. Now the actual horseshoe itself within the center is 19 inches at 100 yards. On the outside of it is going to be 19 inches at 150 yards. So why is that 19 inches important? Well, 19 inches or 18 inches, depending on whom you ask, is the average width of a human torso while they're looking at you. So you can use this reticle, I should say, to range estimate at various distances. So again, outside the horseshoe is going to be 19 inches at 150 meters, and then at the bottom of the horseshoe there, it's going to be 19 inches at 300 meters. And then the stadia lines, as you go down, correspond to 19 inches at that distance. So 400 meters, 600 meters, 800 meters, etc., all the way down. Now, obviously in the real world, we don't always have the capability to tell the enemy or the bad guy to stand and look at us so we can range estimate him. But it does give you something to work with. And if there's something else out there that's approximately that size, it'll get you close so that way you can get your holdovers on. One thing I don't like about this reticle and some of the other ACOG reticles as well is it doesn't really have windage holds beyond at 100 yards, which is, or 100 meters, I should say, which is probably the least likely time that you're going to use it. But you can, of course, walk it in, but we want to get that first round hit if we can. So that's sort of the downside of this reticle, if there was one. Before finishing up the review, I just wanted to mention a couple of those cons like we talked about already. The head position and the eye relief are really critical for this optic. If you're going to run backup iron sights, most of them are going to work just fine, and you kind of have to run it with most M4s or AR-15s kind of essentially so that your optic, the rear lens here, is in line with your charging handle. So you're going to want to run some sort of rear sight that allows you to do that. Again, most will. Any of the Magpul ones, the Troy ones, there's many others, BCM ones, it'll work just fine. So the majority it will, but just make sure the rear sight you're using works with this. So that's one of the cons of it for sure. A 4-power scope, to me, for this guy, is on the high end of what you want to use for CQB. Now, that said, there's hundreds of thousands of Marines out there who have used these and trained with these for CQB type situations and have done just fine. It's absolutely doable. If you're using the bin-in aiming concept, which I believe is what Trijicon markets this as, we're basically using both eyes open and get them on target quicker. It's perfectly usable and you can do it. It just takes a lot more practice than it would with, say, like a red dot sight or 1 power, or 1.5 power rather, or 2 power, or even 3 power. So it's on the high end of magnification for CQB. It is doable though. So I'm not saying it's not, just something to consider when you're looking at it, because certainly there's other ACOG models that are really good as well. So pros and cons there. The pro of that obviously is when you're shooting at distance, really anything beyond, say, 75 meters and beyond, that 4 power does come in handy over, say, like one of the 1.5 powers that we've reviewed in the past. So as always, there's a trade-off with optics. So that's a con or a pro, depending on how you look at it and what your intended use is. If you're like a farmer or a rancher and you're going to be taking out varmints with it and it's just a knock-around optic on your AR, it's awesome for that. Like we talked about, weatherproof. The added magnification is going to give you some capabilities at distance that you wouldn't have otherwise. So again, just depends on your philosophy of use, if you will. Pros of it is that it's indestructible. These things are virtually indestructible. I know there's a story out there and some photos floating on the internet where one of these optics took an AK round that a Marine was in contact with, and the optic actually survived. The round didn't penetrate it, and the optic still worked afterwards. So they're about as close to bomb-proof as you can get. Now, for that kind of durability, you have to pay for it. So I picked this one up over on Amazon. I think it was like $1,100, $1,150. Again, it includes a mount, but that's a lot of money for an optic. That's as much as like a quality AR-15. So is it worth it? Is it not worth it? it's hard to say. For some folks it will be, for some folks it won't be, but the glass clarity is awesome, the durability is awesome. Having that tritium and fiber optic illuminated reticle is great as well. So when you're outside, you're going to get that nice bright reticle coming in from all the light gathered on the fiber optic tube up top. And in low light situations, the tritium is going to illuminate it. Now, one thing I should point out as well is that in bright sunlight, that little donut on this reticle may tend to be a little fuzzy or appear washed out, if you will. That's fine for CQB when you're working, 100 meters and in, but at distance, when you want that crisp reticle, it can be somewhat of a hindrance. Many Marines out there will tell you it's an easy fix, put some electrical tape over the top of it, but a lot of civilians aren't okay with putting electrical tape over their $1,200 optics. So something to consider. Again, pros and cons. But all in all, I'm a huge fan of aim points and ACOGs, as we talked about here many times on the channel. I recommend them more than just about anything else out there because they work. They almost work 100% of the time, and they don't need batteries, or in the case of the aim point, have a very long shelf life before you need a battery. So I'm a fan of an always-on optic for defense. The ACOG meets that, and this one's a pretty good option. So if you guys have any questions about this or anything else we talk about here on the channel, by all means, post it down in the comment section. You can also post over at my Facebook page as always. But thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for subscribing, and we'll see you in the next video.